Hello, and welcome to Faith and Marriage Today. Dr. Mario, it's great to have you back in the studio with us.
It feels great. I'm not just like a little avatar in a box. You know?
Live in the flesh.
I'm freed from my little confines of my little video series that I've been doing. So no, I love the fact that you guys have been doing a wonderful, wonderful job. I love the show. I'm so grateful that you guys are crushing it, and grateful to be here again with you all in doing this episode. So let's do this. All right, you guys ready?
Ready.
Rock and roll.
All right, so joining us is Dr. Sarah Denny, who I don't even know how to introduce you. You have a ton of credentials here. So why don't you just take a time to introduce yourself to the audience and your research and everything you got going on.
Yeah, so I mean, in short, so I finished my PhD about a year ago in bioethics, and my focus is women's health. Currently I'm teaching Christian ethics at Loyola University, and I'm also trying to finish writing a curriculum. I'd like to get into all the Catholic high schools on vocation of a woman. So my goal is always to integrate different pieces that I think are important for formation, specifically biology, with philosophy and theology. So that's really my passion.
Integration.
And I love that's my word I always go to.
So what was the thing that led you, inspired you to those particular, that's very focused and very beautiful?
Yeah, so honestly in high school, I felt very convicted that I wanted to work with women one day. I can't really tell you why, other than, I mean, I was at an all-girls Catholic high school, and I felt like I had this particular fire for encouraging other women. And I did grow up playing sports my whole life, so I was on a bunch of teams and constantly going back and forth to practice, which exposed me to a number of different personality types. But at the end of the day, you know, when you take a step back, we're unique, but we're the same. Like, we have the same hopes, we have the same fears. And so that continued to kind of blossom, I think, and grow. And then specifically when I was a freshman at a university in New Orleans, I took a women's studies class my second semester, and I had gone in thinking, I'm going to be a pro-life OBGYN, this is what I want to do, and I took this women's studies class, and then I encountered these thought processes that, to be honest, my whole little Catholic bubble just popped.
Wow.
Like, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
People think like this? I was like, okay. So then I really just felt convicted that I had this question in my heart of what does it mean to be a woman? And I decided that I would change my major to become a women's studies major, so I'd go to these free lunches just for the food, honestly, and then to listen to what they had to say. And I got really fired up about, you know, I thought I would change the program from the inside out. And it was beautiful in my 18-year-old mind that I thought I could do that, you know, and then thank God, literally, I feel like the Lord kind of hit me over the head and showed me that I don't really know that much. Like, I was 18 and I was still trying to figure out for my own self what that even means. And so instead of doing that, I started reading at the same time. I was reading John Paul II's letter to women and his encyclical on the dignity and vocation of women, Mulier Sinitatem. So I'd be in my dorm room, you know, studying for like chemistry, and then as a break, I would read these things. And as I read those, I just felt, honestly, I felt this wave of relief, like I could breathe. And what I started to realize was that the place that I found rest was in that vision of woman. And so I felt really called to then further that study. And the Lord opened the doors for me to study theology at Holy Cross University with Dr. Chris Baglow and Dr. Brian Petrie. So I was very, very blessed to be able to study with them.
Well, praise the Lord. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. So this has been here your whole kind of adulthood, you know, this kind of question of being a Catholic and a women's studies major at a public university is probably not a unique, it's probably not a common, I should say, scenario. That's probably unique in terms of bringing your perspective into those programs, which is wonderful, and you can see how it's influenced your thinking. And so we should tell the viewers at this point that we're going to have you for 2 episodes. And so this first episode, we're going to dive into the development of that thought that you've had. And then in our second episode, we'll recap that a little bit, but to get into some of the particulars and the challenges that women are facing in today's day and age. And so let's kind of fast forward a few years. So you're a freshman, 18, then you get your master's, and then at some point you say, I'm going to go for my doctorate. And when you go for your doctorate, you're kind of spewing, and I've done this process of like, what am I going to write about? What am I going to, I don't know, I got to land it. And so where you landed your dissertation is in something incredibly unique, which is Margaret Sanger, who, for those who don't know, is the founder of Planned Parenthood, and in many ways is the founder, the foundational kind of thought of so much of modern feminism. That her thinking is really what kind of opened up a lot of the thoughts and behaviors that followed, you know, since then. And then we have John Paul II, who, as many of us know, is a great pope who's written a lot on human sexuality, relationships, women specifically. And your dissertation was to try to bring a meeting of these minds, which many people would think and say, those are just polar opposites. That's oil and water. That ain't peanut butter and jelly. You know, that's not rice and beans. That's something that shouldn't go together. That's ketchup and ice cream. You know what I mean? Those things just don't mix, right? and so,
one more.
I'm done. You know, I don't know. Well, I was going to say pizza and beer goes together, but I can't think of another one that doesn't. So thinking of things that don't go together, but your thinking was to say, no, we're going to figure out a way to kind of listen and dialogue and bring these two pieces together. So just tell us a little bit about that and what inspired you to even do that, and then kind of where some of those pieces of meeting are.
Great. So honestly, back to that class when I was a freshman, I was in that class and I realized, you know, there were 33 of us and we would meet twice a week, and it was sort of like there's no one would agree with anyone else. Everyone had their opinion.
Really?
But my grade was dependent upon my final paper. And I was like, well, if I'm going to write a final paper for a women's studies class, the teacher has to in some way agree with it. You know, I don't want to fail the class. So I watched an entire season of The Bachelor in a week, and then I wrote on the objectification of women. And she gave me an A. And honestly, though,
awesome.
When I tell people, I'm like, that was probably one of the most important classes of my life, because it showed me a few things. But the main points for now would be, there's always potential for throwing a bridge, right? But first we have to listen.
Yes.
Right? So that sort of inspired me, and that was still in my heart, you know, as years go by. And then when it came to writing this, I mean, to be honest, I wish I could take credit, but I really think it was the Holy Spirit. Just one day, I just had this image in my heart of Margaret Sanger and John Paul II sitting and drinking coffee. Now, for me personally, you know, I'm a woman, and where do I usually hang out with my friends? We're gonna have deep talks and we have coffee or tea, you know, not to be super stereotypical, but it happens a lot too. Yeah, and it's like our comfort, you know, we can like cozy up on the couch or something and talk to each other. Yeah. So I felt like.
So you're seeing John Paul II.
Yeah, he's
in
just
like a robe, in his robe, in his little slippers with a little.
Yeah, not quite that
cup
far,
of
but you know,
chamomile,
basically.
you know, mint with a little honey, just kind of sitting.
A little Polish dessert on the side. No. So I saw them just speaking, and so what happened is I went into the research process with that image. And what I started though with Margaret Sanger's writing. So I read, you know, a number of her letters and her speeches and some of her diary entries and things like that. And when I got to more of the hard points of Margaret Sanger, like some of her writings on eugenics, which are very hard to read because she was a eugenicist, I mean, there were a lot of tears shed in this process, I'm not gonna lie, because I also felt the pain of what she was reading in the hearts of women. You know, it wasn't that she just came up with these ideas, it's that she was encountering hundreds of thousands of women are writing her letters asking her for help. And as I'm reading the letters they've written, like I remember one day in particular crying in my car, not to be dramatic, but I was, because I was like, Lord, like, this is too big for me. And I don't know that if I had lived in her time, if I wouldn't have felt the same way, you know? And so I'm sitting there with this image, and I was kind of getting mad at John Paul II. I was like, don't you want to say something? Because I don't know what to say, so can you please confront her? Like, I know it's wrong, but I can't explain it, so you say something. And I felt like John Paul II was the one who was like, no, like it's not time to speak yet. Like she needs to be given a chance to speak, and it's my responsibility to listen. So if I was gonna sit at the table with them, it was me just like, okay, I'm just listening and like watching, you know? And that really is what inspired me to start, and rather really to continue the work in that way. I just felt very convicted that I needed to go with an honest mind. You know, these are places where I don't agree with her, but then also there have to be places where there's potential for a bridge. And I did find some of those places, especially in their desire for women to be happy. You know, they didn't ultimately agree on how that would come about, but they wanted women to be happy. They wanted women to be free to experience life in different ways. But that also revealed then where they would contradict one another. And so an easy way to put it is that I saw both of them were fighting for women to be free. But for Margaret Sanger, freedom was the ultimate goal. So woman's entire fulfillment would come through having the ability to do whatever she wants, right? So she put everything that she was writing and speaking was through that lens. Whereas for John Paul II, who's a champion of human freedom, you know, he also saw the gifts and the value and the essential importance to the human person of freedom, but he didn't see it as the ultimate end. You know, he saw freedom as the means to the ultimate end for the human person, which is love and communion. And that's where they go off.
That's so huge, because the intentions, just because we think we have great intentions, that, well, it's okay because he means well or she means well. And it's like, no, because you can do some really bad things if you don't realize, regardless of where your intentions are. So the actions, the circumstances, the intentions, like, they all got to be in lockstep good, or we're going to run into some serious problems. At the ends, do not justify the means.
Amen, exactly. And I feel like part of what's so interesting to me too is, as I read more of John Paul, like, I loved him before, but as I read more of John Paul II, I saw from his perspective, freedom is such this, it's an opportunity for creativity, you know, that it's not, and this is what I think I experienced when I was 18 reading his letter to women, and I felt like I could breathe. It's that it's not that I'm boxed into one version of womanhood. You know, it's not that I have to dress the same way or act the same way or speak the same way, and nor do I desire that of my students or of my peers, you know. There's certain parameters that we live within, but outside of that, it's that freedom is something that each of us possesses within ourselves, right? But if I really want to live out of that, and this is what JP2 would always argue for with the word integration, right, is he was always arguing that we would have the grace, but also it's like to fight the human fight of self-knowledge, that the more I can come to know myself, the more I can come to possess myself. And the more I come to possess myself, the more I'm free to give a gift of myself. And it's like this beautiful paradox, and then I discover myself anew in return.
Man cannot find himself unless he makes a sincere gift of self.
Exactly.
Sarah, what surprised you the most as you began this process and began to listen to this conversation? What really took you aback?
Well, I mean, honestly, this gets super intimate fast, but I thought their view of the sexual act was so, there were maybe about 15% they disagreed, but about 85% they were like right on top of each other, like in agreement. Like, she has a book called Happiness in Marriage that I had to read because I was doing a research, you know, on her. Not everyone has to read it, but if you put that book next to John Paul II's Love and Responsibility, his last chapter in sexual ethics, they both argue that man should never come to the sexual act expecting of his wife, right? That she says that, like, you can't just sort of, I'm paraphrasing, but you can't just sort of bulldoze over her experiences and her opinions and her needs. You really have to enter into that place with a reverence. And John Paul II is a champion of woman's right to tenderness in that sphere. And I think, you know, people, they throw out the word right on everything right now, you know, and we sort of have lost the understanding that if ever I truly do have a right to something, that means that someone else has a corresponding duty to me, you know? So he doesn't say that lightly when he says that woman has a right to man's tenderness. But he said it knowing that man and woman have this potential to come to this experience that really demands of them a lot of responsibility and a lot of self-sacrifice. And interestingly enough, what Margaret Sanger was also fighting for was that woman would have, you know, again, she didn't end in the same places, but she wanted women to have the same opportunity to not just feel like she's the means to the end. Because she lived in the 1910s, 20s, 30s. Most of the women who were coming to her were an immigrant population. Their husbands were working long hours. The women were working long hours. They might be 30 years old and have had 8 children and be struggling with depression, not because they're crazy, just because they're tired. So she was trying to find this way to help men to understand. And she even, I was shocked by this, but she argued that the best place for the sexual act to blossom is in what she called the blossom of monogamy. And I was like, Margaret, what?
She said that.
Come on, I don't feel like you always acted like that's what you thought, you know? But so really, it was this book that opened my eyes to so much of what she was fighting for. She too would struggle with the competition between men and women, but there was a real part of her that she was trying to help, because also men were writing her letters and they were wanting to help their wives, and they didn't know how to help their wives. So she also saw the good in man at times. Like, in the end, do I think she went completely against it? Yes. But there were moments where she shines through and she's showing, like, no, I want them to find an equal place of potential for love. And she felt like, and she did, she had this particular role. I mean, people from various countries around the world were writing her letters constantly. She would go to Japan, she would go to China, the Philippines, you know, everywhere. And so she had people who were in charge of governments coming to ask her opinion. So, you know, that can be a temptation towards pride, but also there were moments where she saw there's such potential for communion, and she wanted to help foster that.
So bring this back for a second to the conversation of freedom. So I appreciate certainly what you said is that what surprised you was that they both agreed that there's tenderness and respect that needs to happen, which is wonderful. But one of the places that you said that there was a difference is in this conversation about freedom and rights, because that obviously is a big question in our day and age. And it sounds like Margaret Sanger's kind of track of freedom in many ways has paved forward the direction of a lot of the things social issues that we argue for in today's modern context. But JP2 would say, hold my tea, or whatever your version of this is. And so JP2 says, hold my tea, and let me respond to this for a little bit. So break that down just a little bit more. We understand that certainly freedom is essential and is necessary, but as you stated, in and of itself, it's not the greatest good. It's not the supreme value. But there are other values that are more important than that. Right. Tease that out for us a little bit so that we don't lose sight of the freedom as a good, but recognize that there's still something even great, that it has its own purpose.
Yeah. So we know what I would say is when I'm teaching class right now to college students, I'm teaching Christian ethics, and I believe the hardest thing for them to grasp is the existence of objective truth. I really have to, like, I'm 2 months in and I'm still like hitting the nail on the head trying to get them to understand what I'm saying. That connects to this understanding of what we would call this like individualist ethic versus a Christian ethic, right? And what Margaret Sanger eventually is proposing is this individualist ethic where I can define the truth to be what I want it to be, you know? And whatever I need or want in the moment, that's what I'm gonna go do. And so for her, when I say the ultimate end is freedom, is I am free to do whatever I want and no one can stop me. Now, if you look at what she started, right, so it's not that I can even say, you know, someone who's a true modern feminist would probably find a lot of issues with Margaret Sanger because feminisms continue to grow, but that subjective view of reality and the truth, that's pervading through everything, and specifically in women's health. As she started to do all of her work with birth control, she first wanted to educate women on their bodies. But at a certain point, she got so frustrated because it was illegal to put those things through the mail, it was considered pornographic information, right? She got frustrated that she's like, forget that. If someone creates this scientific, like she knew the potential of science because she was a nurse. And she said, if someone creates something that no matter their economic status or their education level, I can give it to women and they can achieve this freedom, then I want that for them. And so that's where I think we can all agree. It's usually the harder way, not all the time, but sometimes when it's the most important issues, it's the harder way is the right way. But you can see where she wanted something for women, but she gets caught up in this desire to just forget the harder way. I'm going to do the easiest path possible. And I think this is where John Paul II, the verse that was on my heart the whole time I would write this was, our battle is not with flesh and blood, but powers and principalities, combined with, from Genesis, one of the curses in the garden where it says, your desire shall be for your husband and he shall rule over you. And so she's moving, trying to push out of, so man then, and this is something that can happen with the modern feminism as we've seen, man becomes the enemy, and then my freedom is how much can I then, instead of me being subjugated to him, it's not even anymore honestly a fight for equality. I would argue it's a fight to then put him under my subjugation, right. You know? And what John Paul II would say is like, whoa, 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 like we're not gonna accomplish anything that way. First, he would say, I understand why you feel that way, and you have every right to feel that way, right? But as I tell my students, we're not determined by our feelings. That's his personalism, right? That my feelings, they give life, right? They give color to my emotional experience, but it is part of my responsibility as a human person that I, through my intellect, my reason, right? My heart and mind, that's hopefully, like, and the more I'm formed, the more I can do this, but that I can order my feelings to reality, right? And to be able to make choices that, okay, this might be what I want in the moment, but is this what's right for me and for this other person that I'm interacting with, you know? Because a lot of times maybe it is, but other times it might not be. And then do I have the self-possession to say, no, either not right now, not at this time, or never, but to live, really that's the gift of freedom, is like, it's the gift of the present moment. You know, I can only live my freedom right now. And I just feel like that's where John Paul II would be trying to offer. And I do not think they would have like left like chummy buddies, like arm in arm, you know? But I do think she would have encountered someone who was intelligent, who first and foremost was listening, and then who was able to say like, Margaret, I know what you want for women and I want the same thing, but you're stopping short of the goal. Yeah. You know, because at the end of the day, now look where we are. Yeah. Right? Hormonal contraception is one of the largest prescribed pharmaceuticals, largely to adolescent women, and are we in a better position than we were? And I would argue we're not. Right? So now we have the freedom to look at it, and instead of like bemoaning the past, which is always a temptation, but to look forward and say, okay, how can we do better now and in the future?
I just think about where, the struggles of women over the centuries. I mean, I remember the stories of my grandmother having to raise my dad and his 4 other siblings on a salary that was like a quarter of what a man would make, but because she was a woman and she was, my grandfather left the family, so left her when divorce was very rare, and my family was in poverty because of this. We've grown so much as a society, but there's things that I don't think we realize just how much we're hurting women in these little nuances of what freedom is, what truth is, and then the expression of how that's truly lived out in the world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, right now what we're looking at is a situation where, and I know we'll talk about this continuously, but like social media and honestly, so my work is largely trying to argue for an integrated model of sex education. And recently I was able to speak to 6th and 7th grade girls at a local grammar school, and that was a wild presentation, y'all, because they're gonna laugh at everything, and like I only had so much time, but we're able to have fun with it, But they had so much fear because they don't know unless someone tells them. And unfortunately, what I'm aware of is I will always argue that parents are the primary educators. Yeah. But I think the difficulty, and this is why, my hope is to be able to provide more resources for parents, but parents don't always know what to say to their children. Right. Yeah. And my hope and encouragement is like, whatever you do not be afraid to look your children in the eyes. And at times you have to say like, I don't know, but say, I want to be with you in this, and realize that social media is just like everything else. It's not an evil, right? It can be used for good, it can be used for evil, but we're also putting into our children questions and demands and responsibilities that are more appropriate for adults, and they're not there yet. But most of their education is coming through TikTok, it's coming through Snapchat, and again, not that we are like, go live in a mountain and just, you can't touch any of that because it's probably not going to work out, But to try to understand their worldview and their experience, because they too want to be free and they want to be happy, and that. And you don't need a PhD in anything to be able to meet your child where they are and really get to know like what's going on the inside. I think that's the biggest thing I can encourage parents. And honestly, for some of you, it's going to be that they could do anything but talk to you because you're mom or dad. But so then find someone else. Like it could be an aunt or uncle, or like one of their best friends, like moms or something. And that's what I told those girls, like always go to a trusted adult. And if you as a parent can have some say in like who that is, then you give them a space to land, because we don't want them to be afraid to ask questions. Yeah. They have so many, and that curiosity is a beautiful, good thing. It's just helping to steer it to places where hopefully they can encourage more truth and encounter, more truth than more of this. There's just so much confusion around.
I know, and as parents, it's so tough. And I know that there's times where you just want to kind of throw up your hands and be like, well, okay, I guess that relationship I can't do. But I think what happens when we get older in parenting and the kids get older, like it's requiring us to still obviously engage, but to be smart enough to say, okay, I want to win this war, this battle, but I'm not maybe the person to do that. So I'm going to, because I know who my daughter is, or I know who my son is, I know this other thing that could help out of this other person. So like, and promote and talk to Lisa a little bit, like what she's doing with her youth group at OLL, and then the Bible study has just been a huge positive influence for my daughters, and I support that, and I'm like making sure that they're able to go when they're there, because I don't think we're supposed to do this alone, and that there's so many confusing factors out there that like, but I guess I would encourage, like, don't give up. Like there's like, don't step out of the fight. Like you are in it. Maybe you're not on the ground, but maybe you're in what's it called, the center control, and you're like sending out the coordinates and bringing out the troops to go a certain direction. So I feel like, Lisa, you're one of the troops on the ground, helping out to help in many ways, not with just my daughters, but I know with many others. But the point is I think that we need to realize that we have to engage, and we have to be intentional, and we have to be able to listen. And that's something I talk about. I need to learn better my parenting, is that I need to hear more where their heart is, so that they, even though that I could probably tell you where their heart is, I need to let them say it, and so that I might maybe understand a little bit better, and so that then maybe I can help them to understand a little bit better where the truth that I'm trying to help them to see is in the context of where their freedom lies and where their understanding is.
Yeah, exactly. I would encourage, to any parents listening, just remember that each of us, there's this deep interior wellspring, and one of the greatest gifts you can give your child is to be able to even teach them how to. Sometimes they don't even know the language or how to put words to the wellspring like they want to. And so it's like when they're super little, like my nephew who's 3.5, he doesn't have that capacity yet, so he's gonna throw things or go on the ground and cry or like freak out. But it's because his little body, that's the only way he knows how to communicate. Yeah. But you're giving them these tools and none of it's wasted, because as they grow and mature into adults, all of that time you spent with them, it's gold.
Yeah.
Sarah, we're going to be coming up to the end soon of the first show, but what would you say would be a word of hope from JP2 that you would impart to parents?
Okay, so he has this quote, it's in Love and Responsibility, so it's directed specifically to sexual love and marriage love, but it's beyond that. I think it's for all forms of love and human relationships, and he says, do not be afraid when love sometimes follows tortuous ways. Grace has the power to make straight the paths of human love. So do not be afraid. At times it will be difficult and hard and tortuous. Sometimes that is what love invites us to, but the grace is always the strongest piece of that equation, and it does have the power to make straight the paths of human love.
Sarah, your work is so important. I mean, what Jason said, we're not meant to do this alone, right? As parents, we need a whole community of people who are going in the same direction, right?
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I mean, and however I can help and be a resource, that is my hope. That's my vision for the future. So,
give us a little word also about your college students. What is breaking through to them?
Oh, well, I mean, honestly, the college students I'm teaching, they come from many different backgrounds, and I've had a few of them share, they might be in AA meetings or things like that. So it's interesting to me. One of them came to me the other day and said, I feel like whenever I'm in your class, I'm in therapy. It's great. And I'm like, this is a compliment. Okay, great. And then like another one had told me, he's not Catholic, but he said, I feel like whenever I'm in your class, I'm going to church. Now, I'm not like hitting them over the head with any commands or anything. Like, yes, we're studying Christian ethics, we're talking about the commandments, but that's not the point. I try to show them the interior invitation within that. And again, they find so much freedom. I will say I've seen this, so much freedom in being shown and taught that their feelings and their thoughts about whatever do not define their person. That moment, I tell them it's a moment of tension that John Paul II talks about, but that moment of tension is the human experience. I reveal who I am in that moment of tension with my subjective experience and objective reality, how I respond. So that they're still free. No matter what they're feeling, they're free.
Praise God.
Sarah, that is a great point for us to end up before we get into our second show. That's all the time we have, but we will continue the conversation. Thank you so much for being with us. To learn more about Dr. Sarah Denny or her work, please check out her website, whatwomenare.com.
And that is our show. This is first episode. Stay with us. We're going to get our second one coming here in a little bit. But please make sure to follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or just learn more about the great work we are doing at Faith in Marriage by visiting us at faithinmarriage.org. Also, if you have a question for us or a comment, we love to be able to listen from our viewers and our listeners. So please leave those comments on the social medias, and we'll love to be able to respond to you.
Thanks for watching. Until then, God bless.